I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for coming. And today we have, I think, a very special conversation. Joining me is a very dear friend of mine, Peter Pannke. And Peter, the same time that I came to India about 45 years ago, and immediately was sort of snatched up by the Naga Babas, Peter at the same time was sort of snatched up by the Qalandars and the Sufis and the Malangs in Pakistan. And he has had as long a relationship with the saints and singers and mystics of Sufi tradition as I've had with the Naga Babas. But in addition to that, Peter has studied and become a master of a number of forms of classical music from India and Pakistan. He plays just about every instrument that I know of. And his specialty is the voice. He is a master vocalist and teaches vocal as well. But in addition to that, in Germany, Peter is thought of, and I know Peter doesn't like the term, but he's considered to be one of the foremost ethnomusicologists. Sorry for using that word, Peter. But in Germany, he's considered to be one of the foremost musicologists, and in that regard, he had a radio show. He's done radio for 30 years in Berlin, and for 16 years had the cutting-edge radio show on world music. He's performed in or produced more than 70 CDs himself. And I consider myself extremely lucky to be sitting with Peter, and I think that that all of you are lucky to hear him and be able to converse with him. So we will be having a discussion regarding sacred speech, the difference between speech, sound, speech, language, and sound, and how music comes into that. And I think that he can speak for sacred music as I am speaking for sacred speech. But before we get into the conversation with Peter, I would like to just go over some of the things, some of the issues that I started in our last master class regarding the baggage, the assumptions that we bring into looking and examining sacred speech. I want you to know why it's so important to me that we do this. It's my experience when I was in India in the early 70s. I became quite good friends with a magnificent professor of Sanskrit by the name of Professor Fritz Stahl from Berkeley, who offered me to come to Berkeley if I should choose, and he would assist me in any kind of further exploration of the subjects that I was into. And indeed, I did come to Berkeley in 1974, and I spent a year in Berkeley at the university, basically under Professor Stahl's tutelage at that time. And I discovered a shocking thing, actually, which was that after 5 years in India having studied Hindi, having studied Sanskrit, living the life of a Naga Baba for 5 years, here I was in the university, and I really didn't know what it was that I knew. I met many students and teachers and so forth who knew exactly what they knew. And when they would ask me what I knew, I couldn't give them any answers. I didn't have any real categories to describe my knowledge. I didn't have the vocabulary in order to describe my knowledge at the time. So
Yes.
here I was at the University of California at Berkeley studying with Professor Fritz Stahl, and I really didn't know what I knew, but I saw that the knowledge that was available there was truly magnificent. I was blown away by it. The library had all these texts that some of which I had heard of in India but assumed you could never find, and there was courses in which I sat in that were teaching all the things that I really wanted to know. Because when I was in India, and I spent my first 5 years as a Naga Baba, I really wanted a manual. I wanted a book. I wanted to know what it was that I was learning. I wanted some way of categorizing it and describing it. So the year that I spent at Berkeley was a year of gathering tools. I thought that when I got back to India, with the tools that I now had, I would really be able to do some serious work. But when I arrived back in India, and I went back to the ashram of my gurus, and I started using these tools, it was like a freight train running into the side of a mountain, that I found, strangely enough, no application. What I learned in a year of studying Sanskrit in Berkeley, there was no application for what I was doing inside of an oral tradition. And the histories I learned, the Aryan invasion, nobody ever heard of the Aryan invasion of India among traditional Babas. They asked me who told me that, and who told them, where this all came from. So I was confronted with a situation where there seemed to be two parallel forms of knowledge that didn't seem to intersect, and I wanted to know how that was possible. The academy was a very disciplined institution. There was very serious scholars and academics and professors there that knew what they were talking about. I could not discount that. And yet, on the other hand, in one of the most ancient and authoritative of all the oral traditions of India, there was a contradiction. This led to a many year riddle and study in which I attempted to find out why this was the case. And as I started to identify my own assumptions and the luggage that I was bringing into my own life, in my own practice, in my own research in India, I started to make some much more serious progress in my own work. So I've seen this as a very necessary step if we really want to get deeper into our work and achieve some greater kind of understanding. Now, that being said, I really should be clear about one thing, that even if we could identify all the assumptions that we bring into our analysis and our conversation, this would not give us an objective knowledge of what we are attempting to study. This will certainly get us closer. This will certainly eliminate some of the obvious errors and misjudgments that we can make when we're confronting knowledge from another culture and another time. But we're never going to be free of our assumptions and our conditioning and what we have been given culturally and linguistically since we're born. My real work here is basically to take you on a trip. It's not to give you specific knowledge of that, for example, Patanjali intended you to have, because Patanjali, for example, lived 2,500 years ago in a culture halfway around the world and had his own historical circumstances. And there were cultural circumstances, linguistic circumstances, and historical circumstances which defined the text that he gave us all those years ago. He had disciples, and those disciples had disciples all the way down the line. And it is the commentaries of the disciples on the original text, commentaries that would change through time, commentaries that would attempt to make the knowledge dynamic. So this is the advantage that we have, is that we do have access to a living tradition, a tradition that even today has its commentaries. And this gives us a heads up when we are looking at this knowledge.